Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in August. So August was actually a really good reading month for me. I finished a total of 13 books. 11 of those were 4-star reads and the other 2 were 5-star reads. Yeah, so it was a really successful month for me. Of the books that I read, 7 were from my owned TBR, 5 were ones that I bought this year or received this year, and 1 I borrowed from the library. The types of books included 2 non-fiction books and 1 collection of short stories. And I also ticked off quite a lot for my challenges as well. So I read 2 books towards my Read Around the World challenge, 1 book was from my book Death Row, 4 books ticked off squares for the Indie Challenge bingo board, and 2 books were from the oldest on my TBR, and also I completed a series, so I'm really very happy with what I achieved during the month of August in terms of my reading goals. I'm going to go through the books again from least favourite to most favourite, but before I do that, I should also say my new stat that I include is how many books I have on my TBR between the start and the end of the month. I started the month with 552 books on my TBR. I read a lot of books in the month, but I also succumbed to a bookshop at a festival I was at and ended up buying quite a few as well, so I ended the month with 550 books on my TBR, so at least it's gone down. Without any further ado, I'm going to get on to the books. The first book I gave 4 stars to this month was Sleeping Murder by Agatha Christie. This is the penultimate book in the Marple series in terms of date published. During the Second World War, Agatha Christie wrote the books that she intended to be the final Poirot book and the final Miss Marple book, and she gave them to different members of her family to be published after her death, thinking that she might not survive the Blitz, but then she did survive the Blitz and carried on writing both series. So in terms of feel of this book, how it reads, it actually feels like it should come much earlier in the Marple storyline than it does. So if I was rereading the series, I would probably read this one much earlier. This was actually one of my favourite of the series. I really enjoyed this one. I've read quite a lot more Agatha Christie now, so I actually kind of did figure out a lot of the story of this one, who the culprit was and what was happening. But what I liked about this one was it was an old murder. The main character, Gwenda, moves into a new house, but she feels like she's been there before, and she has a sudden memory. They're seeing a play. When the actor says a particular line from the play, she has a vision of someone being murdered and the murderer saying this quote from this play, and it's in the house that she now lives in. So with a bit of digging, they find out that actually she did live there when she was younger and her stepmother mysteriously disappeared, so she starts trying to figure out what happened to her stepmother with help from Miss Marple. Yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I did figure bits of it out, but that didn't detract from my enjoyment because it was so well constructed and so well put together, and it's just that I'm more familiar with the tropes that Agatha Christie uses now that I was able to figure that one out. But yeah, I really highly recommend this one. If you're new to Agatha Christie, if you're new to Miss Marple, this I would say is actually quite a good place to start with her. So because I finished that one, I also managed to complete my second Miss Marple Omnibus. It's actually Miss Marple Volume 3. So there were 4 books in here: Nemesis, Sleeping Murder at Bertram's Hotel, and The Murder at the Vicarage. I bought an individual copy of Sleeping Murder so I could take it on holiday, but that was the final book I had to finish from this omnibus. Of all of these books, I think I gave 3 of them 4-star and 1 of them 3 stars, so overall I've given this book a 4-star rating on Goodreads. I have 2 of them now as single volume editions, and I'm going to try and get the other 2 at some point, but I'll be keeping this for now until I can get those individual editions. The next book I gave 4 stars to was my Book Death Row book of the month, which was Room by Emma Donoghue. I chose this one from my Book Death Row because so many people had said they'd enjoyed it that I thought I would try and get to it sooner, so I didn't rely on the dice for this month. I just chose to pick this one up, and I actually did really enjoy it. It's told from the perspective of a 5-year-old boy who has grown up in a single room with his mother, and it's about their story, how they've ended up there, and him coming to understand that the world is bigger than the single room that they live in, and how that plays out for him and for his mother. There was lots about this book that I really enjoyed. I thought it was really cleverly put together, really well written. I did find that the narrative perspective of a 5-year-old boy did get a little bit trying by the end of the book, but it also really worked. So I don't think this book would have been as successful told from a different perspective, either from a narrator outside of the story or, for example, from the mother's perspective. So it worked that it was from Jack's perspective, the boy's perspective, but that also did start to grate on me before the end of the novel. Content warnings in this, it's a little while since I've read it, so I've got to try and remember: for kidnapping, for sexual assault, and for attempted suicide. But as it's all told from a child's perspective, it may be less triggering. But if you're sensitive to any of those things, I'd say be careful going into this. Overall, really well written, and I can understand why a lot of people enjoy it. It's not one I think I'll read again. I was undecided whether to give it 3 or 4 stars, but I thought because the way it was written was so clever and it was so well put together that I thought I'm gonna give it the 4 stars, even though my enjoyment of it was maybe closer to a 3 star. So I would have given it maybe a 3.5 star if you could give half stars on Goodreads. So I rounded it up to 4 out of generosity essentially, but I don't think it's one I'm going to reread, so I'll probably be unhauling this later. The next was one of my highly anticipated books of the year. This is The Quiet at the End of the World by Lauren James. So this I had pre-ordered because I really loved The Loneliest Girl in the Universe, a previous novel by Lauren James. And this one I didn't enjoy quite as much, but I did really enjoy it. I thought it was very cleverly constructed again, and what I really like about Lauren James's books is that, like, her world building is brilliant, but she gives you a little bit of information at a time, and it's usually linked to some sort of mystery involved with the story. I really like her writing and I really trust her as an author, and that means I can go into these books with a lot of questions, and then by the end of the book they're pretty much all answered, but it takes a bit of time to get there, so they are often quite slow burners. This one as well was really good because of the representation in it. The story is essentially told across 2 timelines, so the basic premise is there's been an outbreak of illness across the world that has caused worldwide infertility, so humans are no longer able to produce offspring. The main storyline takes place apparently 85 years after this event, with the last 2 teenagers to have been born, Lowry and Shen. One day Lowry finds a wallet that belonged to someone who was living at the time that the illness broke out, so she is looking up this person on what remains of the internet of social media and piecing together her storyline. Both Lowry and Maya, who's the lady whose wallet she finds, they are both bisexual. There's also, in Maya's timeline, there's a trans character as well, and Shen, the other teenager, is partially deaf, so there was some disability rep in there as well. I just thought it was really beautifully done. To me, it wasn't quite as successful as The Loneliest Girl in the Universe. I think maybe because I was expecting there to be a big twist, because there is in The Loneliest Girl in the Universe, and there was, but I was kind of expecting it and kind of had figured some of it out. But that was fine, it didn't detract from it at all, from my enjoyment of it. It's really, really enjoyable, really recommend this. So this is YA science fiction. This one also was published by Walker Books, which is an indie publisher. So I was able to use this for the Indie Challenge and ticked off a few categories for that on my bingo card. So this was Kids or YA, Marginalised People, Press over 20 years old, LGBTQIA, and a favourite author. Okay, so the next book I gave 4 stars to was Miss Marple's Final Cases, also by Agatha Christie. This is the final book in the Miss Marple series. It's a collection of short stories. All bar 2 of the stories feature Miss Marple. There are 2 odd ones in there which I didn't quite enjoy so much. I would rather it have been a whole collection of Miss Marple stories. A couple of them I'd read before in other collections, but some of them were really, really good, and one of the ones I enjoyed the most was The Tape Measure Murder. Greenshaw's Folly was also very successful. Overall, a really enjoyable collection of short stories, and some of them more successful than others, but a really nice way to cap off the Miss Marple series. So that was a series that I finished this month, and I realise I'm racing through these. It's because I've got a lot to get through. So if you want to know anything more about any of these books, do drop me a line and I will be happy to tell you more. So next book I finished was The Lady of Misrule by Susannah Dunn. This was a book that I bought in Hay on Wye earlier this year. So this was a book that I've been wanting to read for a while before I bought it, because it is about Lady Jane Grey, who is one of my favourite historical figures. She was queen for 9 days in the middle of the Tudor dynasty when Edward VI died without an heir, and the leaders didn't want his sister Mary to become queen because she was Catholic and Edward had been Protestant, so they tried to set up Lady Jane Grey as queen after him, and it all went a bit pear-shaped for them. So this starts with Lady Jane Grey being imprisoned in the Tower, and it's told from the perspective of Elizabeth Tilney, who's assigned to be her maid, her lady-in-waiting essentially, and it's their story, their companionship. It's told from Elizabeth's perspective, so she's reflecting on what happened before to help her end up in the Tower, and she also acts as a go-between between Lady Jane Grey and her husband, who's imprisoned in a different part of the Tower. And I thought it was really well told, gave a bit more of an insight into the different characters and the time period and what it was like to be living in the Tower as a political prisoner. I really enjoyed this one, and I have a couple of other books by Susannah Dunn as well, so I'm looking forward to getting onto them soon. My next 4-star read was The Scapegoat by Daphne du Maurier. This was the first du Maurier book I've read in quite a while. She's one of my all-time favourite authors. This one I really loved up until the ending, and the only reason I didn't like the ending was because they adapted it for TV a couple of years ago and they changed the ending, and I'd really liked the ending in the TV series, so I was a bit disappointed that it ended differently. The ending was just a little bit unsatisfactory for me, but overall I really enjoyed the book. The basic premise is that an Englishman, John, professor of French history, and he's been on holiday in France. On his last night before he returns to England, he meets his doppelganger. He meets a French man called Jean who looks exactly like him. They get drunk together, and then the next morning John wakes up and Jean has disappeared with his clothes and all his stuff. So he has to then decide, is he going to try and track down Jean, or is he just going to pick up Jean's life and take his place? So he ends up taking over Jean's life because he's assuming that that's what Jean is doing to his life. And it's about how he finds his way and fits in with all the family and starts to do things a bit differently. I thought it was just really clever. Daphne du Maurier is a master storyteller. That is why she is one of my all-time favourite authors. So I really enjoyed this. As I say, I was just disappointed by the ending because I was expecting a different ending based on what they did on TV, and it just made me really cross that this ending was really good and I don't understand why they changed it. I mean, I do understand why they changed it because this ending isn't particularly happy and they made it a happier ending for the TV series, but they didn't need to change the ending. This ending was good, and I was cross that it made me disappointed in this ending, if that makes sense. I feel cheated out of giving it 5 stars in that sense, if that makes sense. This was also one of the oldest books on my TBR, so I'm really glad to have got that one off. So the next book that I finished was Imagine Church by Neil Hudson. This was non-fiction, and again this was one of the oldest books on my TBR. This was written after an experiment carried out with a number of churches across the country to help them focus more on the day-to-day lives of the people attending the church and to try and make church more relevant in that sense to what was going on in their lives. So it gave examples of how churches can make themselves and their teaching and what they do feel more relevant, is the word, to what is going on in people's lives, and to make people's daily lives sort of take more of centre stage in what the church does and how it functions, rather than just be about putting on events and trying to attract people to the churches, getting people to realise that they are church wherever they are Christians wherever they are. So I thought it was really good. It's something that my church has been trying to do a little bit, and I'm actually going to be lending this to our vicar and curate to read because I think they really enjoy it and take a lot from it as well. This was also from an indie publisher, so it's published by InterVarsity Press, which it now comes under the banner of SPCK, which is the largest independent Christian publisher in the UK, I believe. I could be wrong on that. So this ticked off debut book because Neil Hudson, as far as I can tell, didn't write anything before this. It's a book from my TBR, the press is over 20 years old, and it's also non-fiction. The next book that I finished was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I also gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I understand now why it is so raved about on BookTube, because it was really beautiful. I enjoyed Evelyn as a character, as sort of a flawed heroine, and Monique as well, and the interplay between them I really enjoyed. I love that it was told from both their perspectives. Monique is interviewing Evelyn Hugo about her life. She's a famous film star and she's reaching the end of her life, and so she's decided to tell her story finally to Monique. I liked that there were sections from each of their voices and that it was very clear who was talking when. There were a few twists and turns in it as well, which I thought were really cleverly done, and I really enjoyed it, and it's a really beautiful book. And I was given this for BookTube Secret Santa, so I'm really glad to have received this. Yeah, I'm not going to say too much more about it because loads of people on BookTube have been talking about it as a really popular book, and deservedly so. I did feel that it lived up to the hype. And you may have noticed from all the books that I've gone through, if you watched my Twitter Picks My Holiday TBR, I actually read everything on that list. So yay me, all of these books were on that list. I didn't read them all during my first holiday, but I did finish them all off in the month, so I can no longer say that I can't stick to TBRs, because clearly I can if I put my mind to it. Just a couple more books to go through. There's one that, if you're canny, you will have noticed was on that TBR that I haven't mentioned yet. That's because it got 5 stars. I'm getting to it soon. So the next book that I gave 4 stars to was An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. I borrowed this from the library and I've had to take it back already, but I really love this book. A really great start to a series, and I'm really looking forward to carrying on with that series. So I really liked the setting. It's really difficult because I've read a lot of books already in September since then, so I'm trying to remember, and I read it quite quickly, the storyline. So it's about Laia, whose family are killed by the Empire, and she goes undercover with the resistance at the military school where she meets the other character whose name I've forgotten. He is entered into a competition to find the next emperor. There's 4 of them. Is it Elias? I think it's Elias. Oh goodness, I really enjoyed it, and it's really bad that I can't remember that much about it. I really loved the setting, so it's kind of had an ancient Rome feel to it, with the Empire, the martial empire, kind of feeling a bit like the Roman Empire, and the scholars who Laia is from, the scholar people, they kind of felt a bit like the Greek Empire, who was overtaken by the Romans. And I loved sort of the way the mythology and the sort of magic system was woven gently into that. I thought it was really cleverly done, and I'm really excited to carry on with that series when I can get the next one from the library. And then the final book I gave 4 stars to was our Ninja Book Club pick for the month, which was The Empress and the Cake by Linda Stift. This was translated from Austrian German, and it was really cleverly done. The story starts with the main character, who I don't think we ever find out her name. She is passing by a bakery and an old woman is buying a cake and says to the young lady, "Please come home and help me eat this cake because it's too much for me and my housekeeper to eat." The young lady doesn't know why she accepts, and then she's gradually woven into their lives very much against her will, and she fights against it, but it's how she gradually succumbs to being involved in their lives. There's a little bit about addiction in here, about drug use and content warnings also for eating disorder. The central character has an eating disorder, and there are some parts that go into quite a lot of detail about how she copes with this eating disorder and how it controls her life. So if you're at all sensitive to that, I would say avoid this book, because I found it quite difficult reading at times. Wouldn't necessarily say that I enjoyed this book. Enjoyed isn't really the right word. I appreciated it. I thought it was really clever and really well put together, beautifully written, but it was a really difficult read in places because of the nature of some of the issues that the characters have and the stuff that they go through. I would say be careful going into this book, but it is really worth a read. So again, this is one like Room. I didn't overly enjoy it. Enjoy is not the right word, but I really appreciated it. I am going to keep this one because I might reread it, because there was just so much in it that I think I feel like I missed bits. I'm going to keep it for now and maybe see if I reread it in a couple of years' time, but I don't know how long I'll keep it for. This also was independently published. It's also, the author is Austrian, so I've ticked off Austria for my read around the world, and also managed to tick off a few categories for the Indie Challenge. So that was author from another country, translated book, and out of comfort zone, because as I say, it made me really uncomfortable reading it in places. So that was all my 4-star reads, and now onto my 5-star reads. So just 2 of these to talk about. The first one was my favourite book of the month and possibly my favourite book of the year so far. I read most of this before August, but I actually finished it on the first day of August, so it goes in this month's wrap up. It is An Interrupted Life by Etty Hillesum. Don't know if you can see that there. This is published by Persephone Books, and they all have this very plain cover, but then inside they have these beautiful end papers. You can see how much I enjoyed this from how many tabs it has in it. This is non-fiction. These are the diary and letters of Etty Hillesum, who was a Dutch Jew living during the Second World War, and she kept a diary up until the time when she went to Westerbork, which was a transit camp, and then from Westerbork she wrote letters back to her friends in Amsterdam, or at times that she was allowed back to Amsterdam because she worked for the Jewish Council. She wrote to her friends in Westerbork. She was eventually transported to Auschwitz, where she died, and I just found this book really moving, knowing that going in, and then just sometimes forgetting and then suddenly remembering what her fate was and the fate of so many Jews at the time, and it just gives a real poignancy to the book. She talks a lot about God and spirituality and how her faith sustains her through these things, but how she also battles with it, with what is happening to her people as she goes through, and I just found it really, really moving. So this is probably one of my favourite books of the year. I would say it is one of my favourite books of the year, one of the most impactful books I've read this year, so I really, really highly recommend it. It is quite hard going at times. She's quite philosophical and quite deep in places. There was a lot of detail about what wartime life was like, what it was like living in Westerbork in transit camp. There are a lot of people living in a very small space, and sort of the fear every week of who was going to be transported. Would your family be safe? So really, really powerful, really moving book. I used this to tick off the Netherlands for my Read Around the World challenge, and it was also from an independent publisher. Persephone is a women's press, so they almost exclusively publish books by women. It's also from another country. This was my first time reading a book from Persephone, so it was a new to me press. It's also a biography or autobiography or memoir, diary, that sort of thing, so I've counted it as a biography. It's a translated book. A marginalised people. The press is over 20 years old. It's also non-fiction, and I've counted it as an anthology because it's a collection of various writings of hers. And then the final book that I gave 5 stars to was Days of Blood and Starlight by Laini Taylor. This is the second book in the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy, and the final book that was picked for me by Twitter for my holiday TBR. So thank you, Twitter, for all the books you picked for me. I've really enjoyed all of them, and that was really good picks for you, so well done. And I'll probably do that again next time I have a holiday, which is not for a really long time now, but never mind. This was a continuation of the stories of the battle between the Chimera and the Angels that began in Daughter of Smoke and Bone, and further development of all the characters mentioned in that. I'm not going to go into too much detail because it is a sequel, but just to say how much I love Laini Taylor's writing style. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know how much I love her writing style. I talk about it anytime I read any of her books. She just writes so beautifully. It's very lyrical. Yeah, a lot happened in this book, a lot of continuation of the storyline, development of the storyline, the different characters and their actions, and yeah, I just thought it was really, really good. Again, content warning for sexual assault and attempted rape in this book, and self-harm actually as well, because of the way the magic system works. It kind of requires self-harm, but if you enjoy fantasy that's written in a really lyrical style, definitely check out Laini Taylor. I'd say start with this series. I think it's a little bit more accessible than Strange to Dreamer series in terms of writing style, but I loved that series as well, so either or really. That is all the books that I finished in August. So just quickly, because this has been a quite long video, just going to quickly talk about some of the books I'm going to try and read this month. First of all, my book death row pick for this month, I used a random number generator to pick a book off the list for me, and so this month is picked Lucky Man, Michael J. Fox's memoir. I really want to read this, so I'm going to try and get to it this week because I'm taking part in a couple of readathons starting from next week. I posted my TBR for them already, so I will link that down in the description box below. You can go and check out some of the other books I'm going to be trying to read this month, but I definitely want to read this, so I need to get to it soon, because my rule now with my book death row books is if I don't finish them in the month that I pick them, then I have to get rid of them, so need to get onto this one soon. It's the next book I'm going to read. And then the book I'm currently reading is Truthwitch by Susan Dennard. I picked this up because I follow Susan Dennard on Twitter, and she has been doing a choose your own adventure series of tweets called The Luminaries, and I'm addicted to it. It's so compulsive reading, so go and check that out. Every day she posts the next section of the story and a poll for us to choose what our action is going to be, and it's just really, really addictive, so I have grown to love that a lot, and because of that I went to the library, picked up Truthwitch. I'm about 130 pages in and I'm really, really enjoying it so far, so looking forward. I'm going to try and finish that this weekend and then go on to Lucky Man before I have to get into my readathon reading. So that is it for today. Quite a lot of books mentioned there. Thank you again to Twitter who helped me pick my holiday TBR. I hope you are happy with how I felt about the book. Please let me know what you thought of any of these books if you've read them. Please like this video if you liked it, and think about subscribing if you haven't. I'm getting so close to 200 subscribers and I'd love to get there before my birthday at the end of the month, so would really help me out if you would like to subscribe. You can also find me on social media. All that information is always listed in the description box below. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!